Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the last book in the Dune series, number 6, Chapterhouse Dune. I feel like I've been reading these books for a very long time, so it's strange that I'm done now, that this is the last one. But yeah, let's get into it. So this book picks up shortly after the events of Heretics of Dune and follows some of those same characters we got to know in that book. So at this point we are very much in the world of the Bene Gesserit, and we're seeing from their point of view this sort of grand attack by the honored Matres on everything in the old empire. And they are particularly targeting the Bene Gesserit, seemingly with the goal of wiping them out completely, probably because the Bene Gesserit really is the biggest threat to them. And the Honored Matres are very concerned about what happened with Teg at the end of the last book, with sort of his superhuman abilities that he gains, probably with good reason. So the Bene Gesserit really does not seem to be doing well in this war as the book starts. They've just lost Lampadas, which is like their school planet, and so millions and millions of Bene Gesserit and acolytes are completely gone. And that's just one example of the staggering loss of their numbers in this time, because the Honored Matres are just completely brutal. So O'Drady is in charge of the Bene Gesserit at this point, and she is, you know, the game master here, trying to figure out a way for the Bene Gesserit to survive this. And in order to survive this, they're going to have to do things that were unthinkable in their past. Then some other major players remaining after the events of the last book are the Duncan Gola that we saw grow up in Heretics of Dune. Him and Murbella, who he's bonded to, a former Honored Matres, live in a no-ship sort of parked on the Bene Gesserit Chapterhouse planet. And this is because Duncan seemingly does not have the immunity from people with the prescient ability to be able to see him. So he has to stay within that shielding to not reveal Chapterhouse's location to the Honored Matres. So Murbella's inside knowledge of the Honored Matres and her journey with the Bene Gesserit makes her a very, very important character, and we will talk more about her later. Then we also start with the Bene Gesserit creating their first Gola, now that they have access to the Axolotl tank technology, and they are making Teg, who died on Dune in the last book. So at this point, Teg is a child, 9 or 10, and his Gola memories have not been awakened. But of course, after all the mystery surrounding Teg, the Bene Gesserit are very curious as to what's going on in his genes that made him have these superhuman abilities that they're not even sure if they believe are real yet. And then, interestingly, Scytale, he's the last remaining Tleilaxu master. We met him books and books and books ago. He is also in the no-ship, and he has secrets of his own. There's sort of this constant bargaining between him and the Bene Gesserit. So the Honored Matres, they are in the old empire. They have strongholds everywhere. They're centered on a planet called Junction, and they're wiping out Bene Gesserit planets one by one in search of Chapterhouse. So we also see in this book a pattern that has become somewhat familiar at this point in the environments of planets changing. So Dune, Arrakis, it is completely gone. It was destroyed by the Honored Matres, which of course has a lot of ripples into the world because it was a religious center. You know, it was the center of Leto's religion. It's where Muad'Dib happened. It was a very important place. And it seems like the building sort of religious hope that's keeping people going in this time is Sienna. Like, she's sort of this ultimate martyr, this godly figure. And generally people believe she's dead, that she died on Dune. They're unaware that she left and went to Chapterhouse with worms. So the Bene Gesserit is sitting on this potential religious power in using Sienna and her status to influence people. I mean, the Bene Gesserit has used religion for that purpose a lot of times, but they've never had such a strong piece of that game. And it's not just Sienna, but they also have the only sand trout and the only potential to have worms again. So that's where we find Sienna at the beginning of this story. She is in the part of Chapterhouse where the sand trout are and where the desert is growing. So over the course of this book, we see the transformation of the Chapterhouse planet into a new Dune, which is a difficult transformation for a lot of the Bene Gesserit who have grown accustomed to the comforts of their planet. So one element of this book that really stood out to me was the sea child, which seems to be this kind of subconscious piece of Odreidi and kind of represents the essential humanity and emotional core that is within her, left over from her childhood. And the Bene Gesserit, you know, they reject emotions, they reject feeling love, they consider those things outwardly to be a weakness, but Odreidi is the Mother Superior, she's in charge, and through her perspective we see this core of emotion represented in what she calls the sea child. And through this we see how Odreidi's giving up so much and making so many sacrifices for herself and on behalf of the sisterhood in order to survive, which is her goal the whole book. She seems to have some sort of secret plan that we don't figure out till the end, and it really pushes the Bene Gesserit as far as they can be pushed in the names of surviving this. But there's one scene in the book where they're traveling out to visit Sienna and sort of see the status of the desert and the developing worms, and they stop along the way at a spot where there is a sea, and Odreidi takes one last swim in this sea and then orders that it be drained, removed completely, because it's not compatible with the desert planet they need to support the worms. And it's a really beautiful, heartbreaking scene. It has a sort of softness in the writing that was a really pleasant surprise. I mean, I really feel like reading all of these books back to back, there's so much development and change in how Frank Herbert is telling this story, and I think that scene's a great example of it and a great way to humanize the Bene Gesserit even more than we already have in the past couple books. So we have these new glimpses of the Bene Gesserit, and we're also getting a clearer picture of the honored Matres and how they think. So we get some glimpses into Junction and Dama, the Spider Queen leader of the honored Matres. We get some ideas about Rebella's thinking and just how they as a group think in general. And they are very, very destructive. They certainly take a scorched earth approach to this battle. You know, they're not bargaining, they're basically killing everyone. And what the honored Matres don't seem to realize is that they may be wiping out the one group of people who could actually help them. Because hints get dropped along the way and the pieces come together in this book that the honored Matres aren't just showing up in the old empire for no reason. They're running from something. There is something out there that has threatened them so much they had no choice but to come back to the old empire and seek something that could protect them. They have this impulsiveness and this littleness in their sort of bureaucracy in their structure, and everybody's sort of clamoring for little bits of almost meaningless power. But the honored matres do not see these faults in themselves and do not see the faults in their own structures. And there is this kind of essential hubris to them that they don't believe they can be beaten. So they're lax in some ways. So history has been a subject in all of the Dune books in several interesting ways. In this one, I think we really see the importance of preserving history, and from the author's standpoint, a lot of value is placed in that. For instance, introduced for the first time in this book is a secret Jewish population that has maintained their traditions and their history thousands and thousands of years, all the way back to old Terra, or, our Earth. And they've basically been living in complete secret, which is, the reason we haven't seen this up until this point. But there is this very interesting sort of familiarity and historical preservation aspect to it. So they come into the story because among their numbers there is what they refer to as a wild Reverend Mother, which is someone not officially in the Bene Gesserit, but has gone through the spice agony and has the other memory of their own ancestors. So after the fall of Lampadas, one Bene Gesserit gets away. It is Lucilla, who we met in Heretics of Dune. But Lucilla is obviously in grave danger, and it's so important to the Bene Gesserit that before one of their order dies, they're able to share their memories so that they live on in some way and their memories live on. So Lucilla shares with this wild Reverend Mother, whose name is Rebecca, by the way, which also is just like part of the Jewish people keeping things from the original Earth after all this time, just like the name Rebecca. So for most of the book, Rebecca is in hiding because she's holding all of Lucilla's memories and the memories of all the Bene Gesserit on Lampadas. So she has this huge wealth of information, of history, of people who were lost in that attack. And we see later in the book, as the Bene Gesserit are reaching the final climax, really how important this sharing ritual is. Anybody who's going to be in a dangerous position has to share with multiple people to make sure that their ideas and their thoughts are living on in someone. So all of the Bene Gesserit, sort of in the top order and the High Council, share among each other before this big battle. And it's really like a spiritual experience. They're all so much more connected, and a lot of the conflict that they had been having beforehand kind of goes away because there's an understanding between them now. And preserving all of those memories is so, so important. So, I mean, it really makes Rebecca kind of the perfect person to carry this, because history is essentially a part of her culture in this book. Something else to mention connected to the ideas of history are the epigraphs in this book. Now, I've talked about this in the videos for all the other books, I'm pretty sure, and that the epigraphs are usually from the perspective of way in the future, past the events of the book, looking back on it as history, or looking back at accounts of it. But in this book, the epigraphs are a little different. They're not written as if we're looking back on it from 1,000 years away or anything like that. The epigraphs feel very present to this book. It's quotes from characters that are in this, O'Drady and Teg. And it's like the underlining philosophies of some of the groups within this, like the Bene Gesserit Coda, some of the Telaxu beliefs and sayings, Zen Sunni ideas, Mentat ideas, sort of all these different sects, the underpinnings of how they think. So that's very different from what we've seen in the other books. And I think, that's part of the awareness of this being the last one is we don't know what happens after the last page of this book. We're not seeing those glimpses into the future in the epigraphs. We're just seeing in the moment how this world is, how all these different factions are thinking about the world. And it's kind of putting the pieces together of how these different sects intersect and clash and kind of fills in the gaps as we're nearing the conclusion of the series. So something that has been developing over the course of all of these books, but I think really came home for me in Chapterhouse Dune, is, we've seen all these different political bodies conflicting over all of these books. We've seen from so many different perspectives what each group thinks is going on in the world and thinks what their motivations are. And the reality is that we haven't really seen any particular individual or group from their own perspective behaving in an evil way. They don't see themselves as that. Everybody thinks that they're doing something for the greater good. People called Leto the tyrant, but from his perspective, he was saving humanity from itself. And the Tleilaxu were sort of this disturbing, strange, mysterious sect. And in Heretics, we got to see inside of their order a little bit and discover that they actually have this religious motivation that they think is for the good of the universe. And no one has gotten this treatment more than the Bene Gesserit. I mean, we see them in a whole different light. We get to know every single major character in this book as individuals with their own ideas and their own personalities, and they're not in any way a unified front, and they're so human despite having all of these abilities that they have. And that's the thing, if you think back to the very first Dune book and how we perceive the Bene Gesserit, it's not a favorable picture at all. They seem like they're desperate to just control things, and Jessica the rebel, we admire her and we're totally on her side for a while. They just kind of seem like these power-hungry shrews to us at the beginning of the story. But as the books go on, we've sort of seen the little bits of Jessica's humanity and her flaws and failings in the eye of Bene Gesserit in every single sister in the order. They all have those pieces to them. So it's really interesting how, the curtains have been opened to them when they were sort of this outside force that we looked at negatively in earlier books to becoming kind of our central heroes at the end. So let's talk about Marbella, who became one of the most important characters in this book and offered a really interesting perspective on the Honored Matres and the Bene Gesserit. So when we initially meet her at the end of Heretics, she is an Honored Matres. Now she is bonded to Duncan. She really seems to love him. They've had several children together. They're sort of trapped in the No Ship together at the beginning of the story. And we discover that the Bene Gesserit plan with Marbella is to train her in their ways, gain her loyalty, and have her do the spice agony and become a Reverend Mother and really be a part of the order. And so we see from Marbella's perspective her struggling so much with her instincts that she gained from the Honored Matres and the kind of essential selfishness of that as opposed to the Bene Gesserit beliefs in sort of community. But she really wants to be a part of the Bene Gesserit, or at first she really wants their abilities. She wants to be able to do what they can do. But as she interacts with O'Drady and other Bene Gesserit, and as she goes through this training, she realizes that being one of them is so much more than she initially thought. It's not just about the powers, it's about this responsibility they feel for their fellow sisters and for humanity, who the Bene Gesserit have really been guiding for a very long time. So she has these really beautiful awakening moments where it's like a spiritual experience where she realizes, I really want this, and I want this for reasons I could never have expected. And she becomes very important to O'Drady because she loves Duncan, which is sort of Lady Jessica's flaw, which is love. Marbella feels that, and she has that, and she doesn't think it's a weakness. She thinks it's a strength, and O'Drady needs that in her. She wants Marbella to hold on to that rebelliousness and that belief in emotion. So we see Marbella's transformation. We see her really fully join the Bene Gesserit and combine the abilities of the Honored Matres and the Bene Gesserit in one person, making her very deadly and also laying the groundwork of what could happen in the future. So sort of a sad aspect to this book is that Duncan and Marbella, despite loving each other and being so tightly bonded, are kind of destined to take different paths. Marbella follows the path of the Bene Gesserit. She does the spice agony, she gains the other memory, and that changes her. And she sort of starts to drift away from Duncan. And all the while, Duncan is having these visions, which is going to lead him on a different path by the end of the book. And it sort of is all tied in with him becoming friends with Sienna and them having their own little scheme on the side, independent of O'Drady's plan to deal with the Honored Matres. So let's talk about Sienna for a bit, who I'm so glad we got more time with in this book to develop her more, because I was a little let down at the end of Heretics of Dune. I wanted more from her, and I feel like we got it now. There is sort of an essential wildness and unpredictability from Sienna, in part because of her Siona line, her Atreides line, and the kind of Fremen spirit that lives on in her. Even though the Fremen don't really exist anymore, she seems to embody a lot of the traits that we are familiar from them. And we see from O'Drady's perspective that she has some doubts in Sienna's role in her big plan, because Sienna's a question mark. There's so much that is unknown about her, and that really disturbs O'Drady. She sees this piece of art that Sienna creates. She's like a sculptor. She sees this piece of art that Sienna titles The Void, and O'Drady's comment is that she sees nothing in it, which kind of means she doesn't know where Sienna's going to go. She can't predict her. She really has no idea. The possibilities are endless. Sienna could do anything she wants to do. She could embrace the religious helm that's been handed to her. She could take on the sand-trout skin and be a second tyrant. She could absolutely do that. So O'Drady has doubts about her and her plan. At some point, she is sort of a potential candidate to replace her as Mother Superior, but O'Drady ends up not wanting Sienna to take on that role. I think Sienna, she has all of these abilities. She's given this power, this position of authority, but she doesn't want to, at the end of the day, participate in exactly what the Bene Gesserit is doing. There's this sort of phrase about being a willing participant in the dream, in O'Drady's dream. And it seems like ultimately she decides to not be a willing participant along with Duncan, which lines up very well with their personalities. I mean, especially with the religious stuff and sort of taking on a godly position in the world. Sienna doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to be used to that purpose by the Bene Gesserit. Then let's talk about the Teg Gola a little bit. So we kind of see Teg appearing in the same ways that he is in the last book. He's just, smaller now because he's a child Gola. But, they're still valuing the unexpected in him, those kind of Atreides traits. And they're trying to figure out this new aspect that occurred at the end of the last book where he had this super speed ability and he could see no ships, which are supposed to be, completely undetectable. So that is obviously a big genetic development, on the same level as Siona having the ability to not be detected by prescience and not to be predicted. This is as big of a development if the Bene Gesserit can use and develop it. But Teg really tries to hide that from them, because that's a big deal. That's a really big game piece, and that kind of power could be equally dangerous to the Bene Gesserit as it is helpful. So I wouldn't say that Teg changes very much in this book. I wouldn't say there's a ton of development in his character. It seems like his real arc happened in Heretics, and this is kind of the second act Gola version of, him just being there to lead a battle for the Bene Gesserit. But there's one thing I want to bring up, which is unfortunate, an unfortunate feature of this series, in that not just in this book, but in several books, there are implications or just outright going there of children having sex or implying that they're going to have sex with adults. And the excuse is always that the children, they, have awakened memories, or they really have the minds of adults but the bodies of children. And that is not a good excuse. It's kind of an icky part of this series, and maybe if it just happened once I could overlook it. It's come up in other books and I have just gone over it and not talked about it, but it has happened so much, and in this book in particular it is graphic. So basically Sienna, in an adult, has to imprint Teg to awaken his Gola memories, and it is not good. It is unnecessary. There had to be another way. If you can make up anything in the world to put in your fictional book, that's the wrong thing to put in it. But anyways, that's all I'm going to say about that. I just feel like I couldn't talk about this book without bringing up that glaring issue, because that is really, really bad. But I will say my critiques of some of the other books about the way the female characters are handled does not apply to this book. All of the female characters are great and complicated and strong and vulnerable and just full, complete humans in a way that hasn't always happened in other books. I feel like every female character gets a full share of time to really be explored. So one thing has improved, one thing has gotten a lot worse. So anyways, like I said, I feel like we're fully getting an understanding of the Bene Gesserit in this book. Maybe for the first time, we're seeing really how they see their role in the world. And we see that they think of themselves as stewards, as farmers that are kind of tending to humanity and tending to, the planets that they occupy. But there's this idea of impermanence around it, that, they don't own any of it, that they're here for now to take care of it for now, but it's not like a this is mine situation, it's a this is my responsibility to take care of this, which is the big contrast between them and the honored Matres. So, just from hearing that description, there is this essential love and humanity and emotion in the work that they do. But the Bene Gesserit deny those emotions all the time. It's part of their coda that those things are a weakness and we don't engage in that, but it seems like they do. So the Bene Gesserit coda and everything that they claim to be is kind of essentially in contrast with the reality of how they live. And really we see this represented in this painting, Cottages at Courteville, maybe that's how you say that, but it is a Van Gogh painting that has survived to the time period of this book and is hanging in O'Drady's quarters. So it seems the Bene Gesserit shouldn't have any interest in art. You know, art is all about human emotion and they're supposed to be sort of distanced from that, but O'Drady has a very real emotional response to this painting. And in it, she sees the kind of wild, creative, chaotic power that humanity has, which is something that has been discussed in the Dune series time and time again. And we see glimpses of this in a lot of the members of the Bene Gesserit, having these very human moments and human flaws and feelings, all while they're sort of denying it. And what O'Drady realizes, and what's a key part of her plan for the Bene Gesserit survival, is that they have to embrace this emotion. They can't keep pushing it aside and pretending like it's not there. It has to become a part of their beliefs about themselves. And that is the central point of something that has been building since God Emperor and Leto's time, and even before that. You know, in one of the books he says the Bene Gesserit, they're so close to what they should be, but they're also so far away from it. And I think what O'Drady has stumbled upon is what the Bene Gesserit should be, how they can really help humanity and really help the universe. It's this missing piece. So we really see Leto's hands are still in the story. He didn't just have plans for the survival of humanity. He had plans for the Bene Gesserit all along. He wanted to see them become this truly good version of themselves. So, as I said earlier, the Bene Gesserit are not a completely united front. There are different personalities, different opinions, and we see this in kind of a major divide. So there are kind of two camps within the Bene Gesserit, sort of arguing over the cost of their survival. What is worth it? What are the results of taking those actions? So from O'Drady's perspective, we see her doing things that she herself isn't so sure she's ethically okay with, but she feels she has to do it for their survival. You know, there's the mention of cyborgs being created to serve the Bene Gesserit, which is sort of a big no-no, this merging of technology and humans so closely. And then the axolotl tanks, which, as we discovered in the last book, are just like deformed, grotesque people made to carry these golas. So that's obviously something of an ethical dilemma. Again, O'Drady deems it necessary, but not all among the Bene Gesserit are on board with those things, because it's kind of the tricks of some of the factions that they're against. It's something the Tleilaxu would do, it's something the Ixians would do. This isn't something the Bene Gesserit should be doing. And as more and more characters kind of start to put the pieces together, there is some disagreement about O'Drady's big plan and the big final battle, the climax of this story, when the Bene Gesserit go to Junction to confront the Honored Matres. And we sort of discover that O'Drady's plan all along wasn't really to win entirely. The Honored Matres have the numbers. That was never really going to be an option, but to win enough to bring over the Honored Matres to the Bene Gesserit side, using Murbella as the key piece in that. So what happens at the end is that we see the characters of this book split in two different directions. One direction following Murbella and O'Drady's plan, and one following Sienna. And that rift kind of represents the ideological differences between those two groups and the individuals of the Bene Gesserit sort of picking sides in that. So on Mirbella's side, she takes control of the honored Matres. She's in charge of them now. Upon Odreides' death, she also rises to Mother Superior of the Bene Gesserit. So she is top dog of both of these groups and uses that power to merge them. And this is for their mutual survival. The Bene Gesserit cannot survive continued attack from the honored Matres. And we find out what the honored Matres really wanted all along, which was the Bene Gesserit ability to be immune to all sort of poisons and kind of biohazard kind of attacks, which is apparently what was happening to the honored Matres out in the scattering. So similar to Mirbella's own transformation, the idea is kind of to dangle the carrot of the Bene Gesserit abilities, and over the course of their training, they will learn, as Mirbella learned, the true value and responsibility of the Bene Gesserit, and really fully join and be loyal to it. So over the course of a long period of time, the idea is that there will be no more honored Matres. They'll be fully integrated into the Bene Gesserit under Mirbella's leadership, and this new generation will have the best, strongest traits of both groups. And we see Mirbella make the point that the OG Bene Gesserit really need love in order to accomplish this. They have to love the honored Matres to really win them over and to break through the kind of hard exteriors that they have. And that's kind of what Odreides wanted from her. That's the lesson that she wanted to give to Mirbella, that you can't deny love, you can't deny emotion, and that's why Mirbella's the perfect leader for this transition. So then on the other side, we have the wild, the unknown, the unpredictable Sienna. So she dodges the kind of temptation and uncomfortable path of following that religious helm that's been handed to her. And she dodges her own moral concerns with what the Bene Gesserit is becoming. She is one of the ones who's bothered by the axolotl tanks and is bothered by the cyborgs and doesn't think that those should be a part of what the Bene Gesserit does. So she commandeers the parked no ship. She takes Duncan with her, who is kind of her co-conspirator in these plans. The Teg Gola is on board. The Jewish refugees, including Rebecca, are on board. Skytail is on board. And then, a collection of Bene Gesserit sisters who chose to go with Sienna. And really, with all these different people representing different factions, Sienna kind of has everything she needs to really create her own world, and her own world with worms, because of course she put some worms in the hold before she left. And she has access to even more than she knows at this point, because Skytail has this secret store inside of his body of cells that could make golas of Muad'Dib and Chani and all of these characters. Every sort of major character in the entire book is represented there somehow. So we leave Sienna sort of scattering into space, so far away that she can't be found, and that they're really starting over everyone on that no ship. And anything is possible. She can do anything. She can create any kind of world she wants. She's really starting over. And that feels very Atreides, very Leto to me. It's like a very fitting ending for her character. And it's noted at the end that Sienna steals Odreides' Van Gogh painting and takes it with her. And sort of the wild creativity of the Van Gogh painting fits Sienna so much. And just with that detail, we know that although Sienna's going about it a different way, she has taken the lesson of Odreides as well, in that she's not denying the emotional core within her. She's not denying the humanity within her. So Mirbella and Sienna both seem to have learned this lesson, this thing that's so important for the Bene Gesserit to do what they were meant to do. They take it in different ways. Mirbella follows the path that Odreides laid out, and Sienna follows her own. but they both seem to have learned that core lesson, and when the book ends, it seems like things are going to work out on both ends. So overall, I thought this was a great conclusion to this series. It felt satisfying. I like the kind of adventurous, who knows what could happen kind of note that it ends on. I love the characters that have emerged in Heretics and Chapterhouse, especially Shiana and Merbella and O'Drady, and, you know, seeing how Duncan has developed at this point. They were really satisfying character arcs to follow. So it feels like a good ending. It feels to me like Herbert sort of stuck the landing on this one. I'm satisfied with this conclusion to the series for sure. So now I've read all 6 of these Dune books. It's been quite a journey, and I wanted to give some final thoughts on the series now that I'm done with it and moving on to the next thing. So God Emperor of Dune does feel like an outlier to me. There's huge time jumps before and after the events of that book, so it feels like it kind of stands alone. I've seen varying opinions about this. Mine is certainly not the only one, but for me personally, it was probably my least favorite. Looking back, Dune Messiah was like not the most memorable for me either. I remember thinking that it was just sad seeing Paul be so sad that whole book. But yeah, I mean, the first book is great. You could just read this one if you didn't want to commit to the whole series. It's a lot thicker than the other ones because we have all this world building and all of these things that have to be established and understood. But if that's your kind of thing, then if you wanted to commit a little bit more but didn't want to read the whole thing, you might just read the first 3 books. I really liked Children of Dune. It was one of my favorites. And then if you're gonna go any further than that, you might as well go through the whole thing, because I think Heretics of Dune and Chapterhouse Dune were both excellent. Especially as a female reader, I feel like the female characters were the best in those books. They were the best written at that point. And I just feel like it answers so many questions, and it expands on parts of this universe that we hadn't really seen yet. I think these 2 represent a really great ending to this series. So if you feel like reading all of this, I would recommend it. It was really great to get to this ending, totally worth the parts that were a little more difficult to get through. Yeah, it's so weird. I can't believe I'm done with Dune. I feel like I started reading this series almost on a whim, and now I like know everything I could possibly know about it. So in my next video, I'm going to be talking about Prelude to Bruise by Said Jones. It's poetry. It has been a long time since I've read some poetry. I'm very excited to get back into that. So that'll be my next video. Okay, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Bye.